Welcome to another Get Better Basketball Live. Today, my guest is Coach Kramer Soderberg, assistant coach at MILLIKIN University, who's going to talk to us about the pack line defense. Coach Soderberg is going to take us through everything you need to know about the pack line defense, including sharing clips of the University of Virginia, MILLIKIN University, and Lindenwood University using this defense. You're not going to want to miss this episode. Another Get Better Basketball Live is up now. Coach DeMarco here with Kramer Soderberg, assistant basketball coach at MILLIKIN University. Coach, thanks for joining us again.
My pleasure. Good to be back on. I thought our first video went over well, so we might as well do a second.
Absolutely, absolutely. So, Coach, I have to ask to get us started today. We're going to talk about the pack line defense, which I know there's a lot of questions out there about this defense, and obviously University of Virginia being the most popular team that use it, and they've had a lot of success. Could you just take us through sort of your history with the pack line defense, when you started using it, and how did you learn about this defense?
Yeah, I think it's becoming a little bit of a kind of a trendy defense right now. In that players are just becoming more and more great at, penetrating the paint, and the athleticism is rising and rising. So I think it's becoming a trendy defense. You mentioned UVA, and I know Xavier runs it. There's a lot of other big time programs that run the pack. So a little bit on my background. Yeah, I mean, I was first introduced to it way back when Dick Bennett invented it at the University of Wisconsin. And I have a unique kind of insight to the defense in that, my father, who was Dick's assistant at the time at Wisconsin, was kind of in the room when the defense was made, so kind of a unique perspective that way. Obviously, Dick used that defense to, propel Wisconsin all the way to a Final Four in 2000. So that was kind of my first initial, learning and understanding of the defense. And that's when I was in sixth, seventh grade there. So, but you still get, pick up little knowledge as a young kid there. And then when my dad went to St. Louis, he ran the pack at St. Louis University. And then obviously he coached me at Lindenwood, and I coached under him at Lindenwood, and we ran the pack there. And then my first 2 years at MILLIKIN, I introduced the pack as well as a defense that program ran. And then obviously they're running at Virginia to a high level. So yeah, it's been really good for me to kind of pick up snidbits of knowledge from, obviously the greatest, Dick, who invented it. And then from my dad and Tony. And, then there's other great minds throughout the country, just thinking of off the top of my head, obviously the Xavier's head coach, and Jim Boone does a great job with the pack. So a lot of coaches, do a really good job of introducing it and teaching it. So hopefully we can get some insight that maybe people haven't heard today.
Coach, just thinking about the pack line at its core, obviously, your father was there when Dick Bennett was kind of thinking through the pack line defense. So do you have any insight into, when he first thought about, implementing this defensive style, this defensive philosophy, what that was like for him? What was his kind of initial thought process when, developing this defense?
Yeah. Prior to Wisconsin, Dick ran the push, which is, on the line, up the line, force baseline, trap the baseline drive. And my dad actually was Dick's point guard at the University of Stevens Point, and that's the defense they ran. But it was funny. It's such a testament to Dick in his humility and the genius of his basketball mind, especially of his defensive basketball mind. But when he left UW Green Bay and went to Wisconsin, I mean, he realized what he was going to be facing there. He was going to be facing Michigan State and Indiana and Illinois, teams with just tremendous athletic ability. And from my understanding, talking to my dad, is where the defense started was from a rebounding perspective first, in that in the push defense, when a baseline drive happens, you bring the weak side defender across to help on the baseline drive, which forces the backside defenders to rotate and leads to usually guards having to box out backside rebounders, which is really difficult. So Dick started thinking, well, man, we can't do that. We can't do that anymore. And so he said, okay, well, if we don't give up baseline drive, then we have to force a middle. And if we force a middle, then we have to push this guy here. And it also stemmed from defense, in the post. So instead of full fronting, if you don't full front, then you have to do something different. And they moved 3/4 on the high side. And if you move 3/4 on the high side, that means the baseline's open. So you can't give up the baseline drive. And if you can't give up the baseline drive, then you got to kind of funnel a middle a little bit more. And if you funnel a middle, then you got to, move those defenders into the gaps, and kind of it led that way. So it was a combination of post defense and offensive rebounding issues that kind of led to the formation of the defense, from my understanding. And next thing you know, they're making a run and really stymieing people with the defense, and it's good. It forces teams to make contested shots outside, and puts a lot of pressure on the defense to make shots, and I think that's a good thing.
You can just hear the thought process that goes into the defense, and just as you kind of reflect on what you've learned about the defense and the initial thoughts about the defense and all the moving parts and how those all come and synchronize and come together. It's pretty cool to hear that process. And before we jump into some of the core principles of this defense, I do have to ask, from when Dick Bennett created that defense to now the teams that are using it, how much, if at all, has it changed over time? And are we seeing different variations of the pack line with different teams, from Virginia to Xavier, and other teams that are using it around the country at different levels? Are we seeing different variations? So just really the evolution of it, if it's changed at all, and do we see variations of it?
Yeah, I'd say you see variations of it, but not necessarily from a thoughtful perspective. Maybe just more of a not teaching it well, variation. If you look at Virginia, they're running the basics of Dick's pack line defense for the most part. Obviously, ball screen defense has kind of become more prevalent as the game has evolved. So I think ball screen defense has changed since maybe the time in Wisconsin, through the late 90s and 2000s. So I think the ball screen defense probably has evolved, but the foundation of the defense, in my opinion, remains the same. And when you see variations, in my opinion, you just see a lot of programs that maybe haven't taught it as strictly as Dick or Tony do. The only maybe main variations that I've heard of people doing is just moving the pack line further out. When Dick originally, created it, it's about a 15 to 13 foot arc, kind of intersecting the elbows. And I've heard of teams kind of making their pack line the 3-point line, or, the high school 3-point line and stuff like that. So I'd say those small variations I've seen, but for the most part, ball screen defense definitely has evolved, and, you have to come up with different ways of defending that. But for the most part, I believe the foundation of the defense remains intact with the teams who run it correctly.
So, Coach, for teams that, want to run the pack line to the best of their ability, can you take us through some of the basic principles of the pack line defense? Right.
Yeah. So first, kind of the overview kind of basics of the defense is what is our goal for the possession? And most defenses' goals, should probably be the same. But specifically for the pack line is we want to make the team play against a defense in the half court. Okay, so that's priority number one. We have to make this defense play against us in the half court, which requires great transition defense. Okay, and I think my dad mentioned to me probably a month or so ago, but he said Dick would always say this at clinics to high school coaches. He said, if you want to be a better defensive team next year, just don't give up any transition baskets. Whatever you have to do, don't give up any if that means on the shot, send 5 guys back so that you never give up a defensive transition. He said you could switch no part of your defense. But if you do that and not give up any transition baskets, you will be a better defensive team automatically, which is a very wise thought, because if you're continually and constantly giving up layups in transition, of course your defense isn't going to be that great. So step one is to make the defense play in the half court against our set defense. Goal number two is to make the offense take a contested shot outside of the pack, which I'll show here in a second. And then thirdly is rebound the miss. Okay, very simple. Make them play in the half court, make them take a contested shot outside the pack, rebound the miss. That's it. Okay. So this is just basic explanation. The pack line is about, 13, 15 feet, just basically a small 3-point line kind of intersecting the elbows. And that's the heart of the defense. And basically there are two options when you're playing defense in the pack. And the two options are this: you're either guarding the ball or not guarding the ball. And those are very, people would say, of course, yeah, you're either guarding the ball or not. So, but that's really important, because there are two things that you have to be doing. Obviously, when you're guarding the ball, we can talk about this here in a little bit, but you want immense ball pressure. I think there's a misconception about the pack that when we play the pack, we're going to be very soft. It's going to be kind of a zone-oriented defense, and we're not going to pressure the ball. That is completely false. Pack line is a pressure-oriented defense. So when you are on the ball, you want to have active hands. You want to be pressuring. You want to be just all over that ball handler and making it really difficult on them. But then most especially what is kind of most unique to the pack line is when you're off the ball, you have to follow 3 rules. Okay. And you have to check yes to all 3 of these rules if your man doesn't have the ball. 1, you have to be in the pack. Okay. So that's rule number 1. When your man doesn't have the ball, I have to be in the pack. Okay. 2, you have to be closer to the ball than your man is. Closer to the ball than your man is. And 3, you have to see ball and man at all times. Okay. So those are the 3 rules. If my man doesn't have the ball, I have to check yes to all 3 of these. Am I in the pack? Am I closer to the ball than my man? Can I see ball and man at all times? And if you do those 3 things, you're going to be in pretty good position as a help defender. Okay. So again, I'll pull this up here, and we'll kind of explain that. This is very simply just kind of a basic diagram of, if the ball's here on the wing, we have 4 guys in the pack. All the guys, they're closer to the ball than their man. And if they're doing it correctly, they have vision on ball and man and can see both. Down here is a little example I'll show of off-ball defense and kind of what I mean by going through that checklist. This first one is the correct positioning. Okay, this man's in the pack. He's closer to the ball than his man, and he sees both ball and man at all times. Here's some incorrect options that I see very often. Okay, this first one is this man in the pack? No, he's not. Right? He doesn't check off number 1, being in the pack. He is closer to the ball than his man, and he can see ball and man, but he's not in the pack. So he's not in the proper position. Okay, here's another one. He's in the pack. He can see ball and man, but he's not closer to the ball than his man. And this is probably the most common mistake right here, this one in the middle. This is the most common mistake that defenders make in the pack line, is that they'll be level with their man or maybe between their man and the rim, and that's just not proper positioning because they're not closer to the ball than their man. He should be up in this area. And then here's another example. He's in the pack, he's closer to the ball than his man, but if his vision is just looking at the ball, then he's incorrect, right? So that kind of very quickly gives you kind of that 3-step process of making sure as a help defender you're right in the right position. And that second option that I showed is very common of mistakes that I see a lot of teams who claim to play the pack. That's a common mistake that most teams make, is that they'll be very deep in the pack or kind of the same level as their man, and that just doesn't mark off those 3 check marks.
Coach, can I just ask two logistical questions in terms of just looking at that pack line and one of those diagrams, the player was well inside of the pack line. is, what does that typically look like for coaches? Ideally, do you want them on kind of that imaginary line? Are there times where you want them more inside? Is it a scouting based thing depending on the team you're playing against? What does that typically look like? Thinking about coaches that want to teach this,
Yeah.
how close or like how hard and fast should they follow the actual line? I know they obviously don't want to be outside of it, but can they be further inside, or what does that look like?
Yeah, you definitely, especially if you're one pass away from the ball, you definitely want to be high up in the pack. The higher in the pack you can be, the better you are. The deeper you get in the pack, the worse off you're going to be, because that makes your closeout longer. So if I'll draw something up real quick here just to kind of diagram it. If we have the ball at the top of the key and I'm defending a man here, obviously we're pressuring the ball there. If I'm deep in the pack here, I'm in the pack, I'm closer to the ball than my man, I can see ball and man, but I'm so deep in the pack, if you see that, I'm so deep in the pack that when this penetration happens, that's a really long closeout. That's a 10 to 12 foot closeout there, opposed to if I'm 1 foot in the pack, or kind of right on the edge of the pack, high up in that pack, then that closeout really shortens to 6 to 8 feet, opposed to that 10-foot closeout. So that's a good question. The higher up in the pack we can be, the better off we are. And then obviously, if the ball is, I'm gonna draw this real quick, if the ball is away from me, okay, if the ball's away from me, then that's a time where, yeah, you're going to be lower in the pack in that situation, just because the ball's, probably more than 2 passes away, and that's okay. But as the ball gets swung here, then we move up higher into the pack so that our closeout's shorter. Okay, but that's
just one other logistical question. Just thinking about positioning. One of the rules being, the player being between. Are closer to the ball, right? So, and hopefully I'm wording that correctly, but so just thinking about that off-ball defender, is it that they, how much do they want to adjust there? I'm thinking of like pressure defenses on the line, up the line, all that kind of terminology. So is it that they just want to be 1 or 2 steps closer to the ball than they are, to be between the ball and their man? How hard and fast do you follow that? How close do they want to be? How much do they want to close that gap in? Or is that something that varies from time to time? I saw in different diagrams, that player was a little closer to the man in some instances, and other ones they were a little bit closer up towards where the ball is on the high side. So what does that typically look like for coaches that might want to teach this as well?
Yeah, I would say, obviously when you get deep into scouting and whatnot, obviously if you're playing against a great shooter, then you probably want to nudge a little closer to that shooter than you would a poor shooter. But in a perfect world, a basic scout with maybe not worrying as much about the individual and just playing the defense, I would say splitting the difference is a pretty common thing. If you want to be closer to the ball than your man, I would say splitting the difference between the ball and your man is a really good position to be in. And then you kind of ask about kind of adjusting your positioning, and a great line is terminology that we use is, when the ball moves, you move. When your man moves, you move. So, and then I always ask, you always ask your players, when is there ever a time where your man or the ball isn't moving? And they'll usually say, well, never. One of those two is always happening, if not both. Absolutely. That means you should never, as a defender, not be moving. You should never not be adjusting your position, because when the ball moves, you should move. When your man moves, you should move. When both of those are happening at the same time, then you really should be moving. Okay. So that's something that, again, you'll see with kind of defenses or teams that are running this for the first time, or kids who haven't run it before, is off the ball they'll be very stagnant, very still, and not realizing that, man, anytime this ball moves, I got to readjust my positioning. Anytime my man moves, man, I got to readjust my positioning accordingly. So that's one thing that is difficult to pick up. And I've noticed that, and even as a player, you kind of recognize this, it's somewhat nerve-wracking to play this defense, because it forces you to get further away from your man than you're actually comfortable with. you know, because in a denial defense, you're pretty close to your man when you're denying him. You know, you're about arm's length. But in the pack, you have to kind of trust the system. You got to trust your closeout. You got to trust your vision, because there's gonna be times in the possession where you feel like, man, I'm a mile away from my guy and I am gonna give up a 3 or something. And that's just something that kids got to get used to. They got to trust the system. They got to trust their training and their closeouts and their anticipation and all that. But yeah, that's definitely kind of one thing that kids have to kind of get out of their head, that it's okay. You should be kind of further away from your man than you're comfortable being. And when they get used to that, and when they start trusting their closeouts and their anticipation, that's when they start to get it, and it starts to become easier for them.
So we think about the basic principles of the defense, and now thinking about the basic principles when you're off the ball. So what's the next aspect as we're teaching, or as you're teaching the pack line, or as coaches would be teaching us? What's the next thing they would have to think about?
Yeah, on the ball defense is obviously really important, and the way you teach kind of positioning and foot positioning is very important. I think a tendency that a lot of coaches have is, obviously, you know, the basic rule of this system is that you can't get beat baseline, right? If you give up baseline, you don't have any help to the baseline, because our post man is 3/4 on the high side, which we can talk about later. Our backside guys, because we don't give up baseline, are closer to their men on the far side. But I think the tendency of coaches to say, we don't give up baseline, can have a negative effect, in that some players will so much shade protecting the baseline that they'll give up straight line drives to the middle. So something that, we're very prominent about with our guys is, yeah, we don't give up baseline, but we don't give up straight line drives either. So that's a really important aspect of this. And I've heard other coaches, say, guard your yard. You have to have an ability to guard a yard to your left and a yard to your right. Like that's good terminology there. So we teach our guys to have, a slightly shaded stance towards the middle, but we really are on top of them to not get too crazy with their feet. Because the more you face your feet to the middle, the easier those straight line drives are going to be. And then active hands, all poor defenses that I've ever watched, whether it's the push or whether it's, the pack line, or even if it's a zone, are teams that don't have active hands, that hands are always to the side of them, that there's no movement, there's no tracing of the ball, there's no mirroring. And that is a huge aspect of this defense. And if you ever watch Virginia play or Xavier play, they always have active hands. The more they get, so many tips and deflections and different stuff just because of the active hands. Obviously, when you're talking about on-ball defense, the most important thing is the ability to close out, and having the choppy feet and be able to sit down, butt down, hands up. And if you can't close out properly, you're going to struggle in this defense, because it's predicated on having a team that can close out, because you're in the gap, and when that guy drives the gap, you have to be there, anticipate the pass, but you're still put some pressure on you to make great closeouts. So I think all those things, working on active hands, guarding your yard, having great closeouts, all are vitally important for this defense.
Thanks for taking us through kind of the background of, the philosophy, the basics of it, on the ball, off the ball. Now I'm excited to take a look at some film clips to see how this looks in a game.
I have some clips of Virginia, kind of giving us all different levels. I have some clips of Virginia. I have some clips of us at Lindenwood when we were there, Division II school. And then I have a few clips in my first couple of years at MILLIKIN of just some examples there. So we're kind of going to see all 3 different levels here, which will be good. And we can just talk through these and kind of ask different questions about that, and we'll kind of see where it goes with the conversation. So here's a good example of just some gap defense, some examples of good positioning. And you can see here, Kihei, his man is out here, but again, he's pretty close to the pack. I would say the pack's like right here, so maybe he's 6 inches above it, but he's in very good help position here. And they set a little ball screen, which we'll get into here in a little bit, but this just shows the perfect position of what we want the offense to see. We want the offense always to see a clogged paint. You know, we want that ball handler who's looking to penetrate to see bodies in front of him so he doesn't even think about driving, you know. And that's one of the biggest difference with maybe the pack than other defenses is that our positioning is our help. Okay, so we're not helping and recovering, we're only recovering. And you'll see Kihei do this, is a lot of defense will help and recover. So Kihei will be out by his man, and as he sees this guy drive, he'll help, so he'll lunge into there, and then he'll have to recover after the lunge, opposed to the more, kind of in my opinion, the more sound way of doing it is being in help in the first place. So Kihei's already where he needs to be. So now all he has to do is recover to his man. He's in help. Now he can recover to his man. Okay, the possession keeps going here. You can see, again, very good positioning. Right here we have closer to the ball than his man. He's in the pack. He sees ball and man. Again, another one closer to the ball than their man. Sees ball and man in the pack. And you can think as a ball handler's perspective, when you look down the court and you see 2 guys in those gaps, it's just going to automatically prevent you from even trying to probe that defense. Okay, again, another example of a ball screen we'll talk about later, but you can see the gaps and how that defender there just makes a difference. Okay, great possession of defense there. You can see the active hands. Their hands are never stale. They're never just not moving. Okay. That last clip was from their championship season. This was from 2018 when they went to an Elite 8. And again, here's a perfect example of a pack line, you know, in the pack, closer to the ball than your man, having vision on ball and man. And again, from a ball handler's perspective, when you see this, you're not even going to attempt to, you know, penetrate that gap. And this is where I'll just make a point from a perspective of the mistake I see most often is this one, where most players, they want to be in between their man and the rim. Okay. So if you I think you can see my cursor, but if you can see my cursor, most players will make the mistake of being down here. Okay. They'll be between their man and the rim, and they won't be closer to the ball than their man. And if London was down here, then you would realize this gap would be wide open, right? And that man would feel a little bit more comfortable penetrating that gap. But because he's closer to the ball than his man, because he's high up in the pack, he sees ball and man, he's in perfect position to help. He anticipates that pass and gets back to his man. Again, there's the gap. Both are in perfect position. And you see a really good segment of defense here. Here's a clip of us at Lindenwood. Again, this is in transition, but here, you know, one of our guys is again, his man is here. He's in the pack, closer to the ball than his man, sees ball and man. And that penetration happens, and he's there, and he anticipates, and he closes out. Here we have a little bit of a hang up with a kind of a slip screen, but the next man up, he's in the pack, closer to the ball than his man. He's a little bit deep in the pack here. We kind of talked about that, how high up you want to be in the pack. In a perfect world, we would probably want him up here, you know, closer to the high point of the pack line. He's a little bit deep, but ends up doing his job and is able to anticipate and get back there. And then the next gap was pretty well filled here. I'd say maybe a little bit higher up here to fill that gap a little bit better, but he does a pretty decent job. The ball defender guards his yard. And then there was a really good example of kind of a double gap. And I think somebody on Twitter may have asked that question about a double gap. And here's a perfect example of it when we get to the edge of the clip. Good help there, pretty good closeout, pretty good help. Want more active hands, but here's that double gap kind of that we see here. And this is really hard to guard. And this is what a lot of teams will do. They might overload a side, and they'll have a ball handler at the top of the key, and they'll put a guy in the corner. And you can see this is just a huge gap. And what's really difficult about this is this man has to be kind of all the way over here. you know, so he has to be basically between, you know, as close to in between the ball and his man as we can get. And if he can protect that elbow there, we'll be in good shape. But what's really important is the backside guy, this man here, should have 1 foot in the paint as his man's away from him, which he doesn't quite have. Okay. So he could be maybe a 1 step further. If this man was 1 step further, then if the ball goes here, he can maybe bluff at him while this man gets back. But it's a really difficult challenge. And that kind of answers another question that somebody has: what's the most difficult actions to guard in the pack? And I'd say a big double gap is challenging to guard. But that at least gave you a good idea of, you know, some decent gaps. Okay, so here's some more gap defense. Good, we're chasing, kind of filling that paint there. He's a little bit high right next to him, but you can see what this is going to do to the offensive player. He just sees clogged paint. He sees a clogged paint, and this guy was a great driver. And we really emphasized in this game of packing the paint, of really clogging things up and making him see 5 defenders when he looked at the rim. And that's what we got here. Great gap help there. We recover, we contest on a shot, and we get the rebound. So that was a pretty good example of kind of filling those gaps. And terminology that we use with our guys is, especially when the ball's at the top of the key, is protect the elbows. Okay, protect the elbows is a really good thing that can kind of give kids maybe a starting point of where should I be. We should always be protecting the elbows. If the ball's at the top of the key, we should have 2 guys protecting the elbow. If the ball's on a wing, we should have a guy who's defending a guy at the top on that ball side elbow.
Okay. Coach, one of the questions we got, and it looks like we're going to get to it right here with this clip,
Yep.
is thinking about defending a 1-4 high set. And it looks like we're going to get maybe an Iverson cut here across the top. But can you just take us through this clip and how you guys defend that 1-4 high look?
Yeah, the most important thing when you're facing a 1-4 high-low is we never want to pass into the pack. So these guys defending the elbows should be 3/4 on the high side, just like they would be in the post. Okay, we never want to get a catch at the elbow. So if teams, which a lot of teams like to do, is when they're in a 1-4, they're going to try to throw to that elbow guy. And most importantly against a 1-4 is that you don't let those elbow catches happen. Okay, so you want to be 3/4 on the high side, well enough in there where your arm is, you know, protecting that pass, but also not full fronting where they can just throw it over the top and get a layup on you. Okay, so you want to be able to push those elbow catches outside the pack, and if you're doing your job, outside the 3-point line. And then a lot of teams will run the Iverson, you know, the Iverson stuff. And really nothing changes when they throw it to the wing. Obviously we don't give up baseline. And when a team's running a 1-4, that's good. You don't want to give up baseline because everybody's up high anyways. But I would say the most important thing on the 1-4 is you don't want to get those elbow catches, you know, right at the elbows. You want to push them out to the 3-point line, which will tend to need your big guys to do a 3/4 on the high side to take that away. Okay, there's some ball screen stuff. Again, we'll go into that more fully here in a little bit. But again, I just showing the gaps. Malcolm was a little bit outside of the pack there, but still pretty good gap. And you can see the tendency of players as they get knowledge of the man who has the ball or who doesn't have the ball is, and you can see kind of here, Devin is guarding one of their main guys. This guy maybe isn't as great a penetrator, so he's not in the pack necessarily here because it almost is kind of a scouting report type of thing. But then as the ball goes away from him, now he's back into it. We got gaps filled. Guy here, protect those elbows, guard your yard, be in perfect position. And it just makes things really difficult when you clog the paint that way. We'll see one more example of kind of clogging the paint. In this particular game, I made an extra emphasis as a defensive game plan. When a certain player, number 5, got the ball, we were going to flood the side of the floor that he was on to make it even more apparent that he didn't have any penetration. So here's an example. Here's their best player, best driver, probably in the league that year, gets the ball, and we're pressuring the ball, but we bring all 5 guys basically to the midline. Now that normally isn't what you're going to do with the pack. Normally the backside guys will have 1 foot in the paint, but for this particular team, because in my opinion, this guy was their main guy. He was a driver. The secondary players weren't great shooters. We decided to kind of flood. Anytime he got the ball, we were going to flood to one side of the floor. And you can see that here, that we basically have 5 guys on one side of the floor when he got the ball. And it was just the sole purpose was to make him see 5 jerseys in his way so that he wouldn't even think about driving. And as an offensive player, if you see that, I mean, that's pretty extreme, you know, like that's 5 guys who can almost touch each other. But that was the game plan for that night, and it worked effectively against him. And so again, there he catches it on the wing, and we're flooded the paint. We flooded the paint. We want him to see 5 guys, and we're going to bluff at that guy who wasn't a great shooter, and we got the rebound. So that was kind of an example of clogging the paint. Little bit of a scouting report adjustments to the pack where we almost clogged it more than you usually would, but I think that was good. Just a few other things before we get into the ball screen stuff. You know, coaches always ask about off-ball screens, cross screens, stuff like that. Here's a simple cross screen against Purdue in the Elite 8 game. Kyle does a great job as his man goes across. He bumps on the low side. Mamadi goes over the top and meets him, basically beats his man to the block, which is a good position. And then Kyle's up there perfectly in time to get his man. They post doubled off the ball, which normally doesn't happen. I don't think that was a part of the plan, and Ty just went and did it. But that gave you a good idea of kind of a good way to defend a cross screen is you bump on the low side and you chase over the top.
Coach, fighting through all those screens, or is there any opportunities to switch game plan wise, or is it, you know, fighting through, or in that instance it was a bump and then, you know, recover? But is that pretty typical, more typical, or is there any switching that might happen?
Very rarely off ball are you going to see the prototypical pack line team switch off ball screens. However, on ball screens are a little bit different. You know, in the championship year with Virginia, they had a really versatile kind of core group of guards, especially with DeAndre Hunter, who was playing the 4, who could basically guard a 1 through 4. They would switch ball screens, you know, with that personnel. But you rarely see off-ball screens switched, and here's a good example. We're going to see Syracuse was setting a ton of down screens in this possession, and you'll see how Virginia chases those screens really well, and the defenders who know their man is about to come off to a screen are preparing themselves to chase that screen, and you can kind of see them. We would teach almost get into the small of the guy's back, you know, like you're playing tag and you're hiding behind that guy almost. And you can see both Harris and London are going to do this. They're going to get in the small of the guy's back and chase him around there. London knows his man's about to come off a screen here. He gets in the small of his back and he chases him around. And then you see the bigs do a quick show. On a single screen, they're just going to do a quick show, kind of show their numbers and be back. And London chases that really well. There's another getting the small of his back and then chase him off that screen. There you go, just small of the back, quick show, and they're there. Beautiful example of London jumping to the ball. And that's something that we didn't talk about yet, but highly important, crucial for the defense is jumping to the ball and getting your kids to understand that when the ball gets passed, from when you go from ball defender to gap defender, ball defender to off ball defender, you have to jump towards the ball no matter what. And I think a lot of kids have a tendency when their man passes the ball to say, okay, good, my job's done now, I can relax. And that's totally not the case. And here's a perfect example. We see London do it beautifully, is he jumps to the ball here, maybe not as explosively as you'd like, but he gets into position quickly after his man passes. And if he wouldn't have done that, if he would have just stayed by his man or maybe just back straight up, that gap, that elbow would have been really open. But he kind of jumps to the ball, gets in position, he's able to show himself in that gap, and then they set a flare screen off of it. Which is funny. It's kind of the same action that we talked about last time. And he chases over the top of the flare screen, does a great job of contesting. Anthony Gill's in the gap protecting that elbow. Really good possession of defense here. They chased a lot of screens. And there's an on-ball screen, which we can start talking about now as well.
Just seeing the level of effort, and just in that possession, to jump to the ball the way he does and then recover to that flare screen. I mean, and he's there on the catch. How important is that in terms of, being in the gap, but being able to then jump to the ball to get there and meet the ball on the catch? Is that something you guys spend a lot of time working on? Something a lot of time talking about?
Huge. The best defenders are the best anticipators. You have to be a great anticipator in this game as a defender, or you're going to stick in the gap and you'll stay in the gap too long, and then your guy's going to get open shots. So what we teach our guys, or at least try to emphasize a lot with our guys, is recognizing what kind of mentality does the ball handler have. You'll see a ball handler, and sometimes they just got this look of, my head is down, I'm punching this gap no matter what, I'm getting to the rim. In that situation, he's going north south, he's got a mentality of getting to the rim. You might have to stay in your gap a little bit longer. But then there's other times where some offensive players will they'll have a half-hearted kind of east-west drive, and they're just trying to toy with you to make you stay in that gap longer so that they can pitch out for a three. And recognizing kind of that difference in mentality is really important in the anticipatory factor of getting to your closeout. You have to recognize, is this man going east-west and is not a threat to puncture our defense? If so, start working your way back to your man. If this man is, hell or high waters is getting to the rim, then you better stay in the pack a little bit longer and hold that gap. So that's really kind of something that kids will learn as they go. But the best pack teams have an ability to recognize that type of difference. Is, do I need to stay in the pack for an extended period of time and really help? Or can I kind of just be there, show myself, and then get back because I believe my man has the on-ball defense under control? So that's a really good thing to talk to your players about and discuss and make them aware of.
Coach, how challenging is it? I know we talked about double gaps being challenging, but I was watching that last possession that ended with the flare screen, and there was down screens. There was a lot of movement. How challenging is it, really, I guess it's any defensive team, but just think it's specific to the pack line, for players to keep their responsibilities on the weak side or, on the pack line, and then with that movement, is that something that you guys have to spend? I mean, I'm imagining there's a lot of practice time that's devoted to those types of situations or the movement, and also honoring some of the responsibilities you have as well.
Yeah. When teams really move well without the ball, it definitely makes it more difficult, because like I mentioned earlier, when the ball moves, you move. When your man moves, you move. So the more the ball and the man are moving, the more you have to move as a defensive player, and that it makes it more difficult. But it's funny, and again, this is another thing that we stressed a lot with our players, the better you get as a defender at being in the correct positioning, the easier your life becomes when chasing guys off screens. If you don't have great positioning and a team is really moving and cutting and doing a lot of things, you'll tend to see defenders just chasing them all over the court and wearing themselves out by just chasing the cutters. But if you really know your positioning well, if the ball's away from you and that guy comes off a screen, you don't have to chase him all the way over there. You're already in position, and you work smarter, not harder, when you really know the positioning well. So it's important for, kids to learn that just because my man's moving a lot doesn't mean I necessarily have to. I just have to be in the proper positioning, and I'll be able to defend what's going on. But I think what's most challenging, especially for young players, is learning to have vision at all time. That's really difficult. It's a lot of kids will want to just look at the ball, want to just look at their man, or they'll want to, do this, a lot. And the guys who just have an ability to kind of look down the middle and see both are the ones that really, really are good in this defense. So yeah, that's a really good question. And another thing that's difficult when you're playing the pack is, teams that move a lot is difficult to guard. The double gap is difficult to guard. And then teams who screen right on the pack line. That's another difficult thing to defend, is when teams kind of set down screens or flare screens or beeline screens right on the pack. That's something that's always challenging to defend as well.
That's a great point on the peripheral vision in those situations. I remember my brother who coached with me for a lot of years, and he used to always tell players, he would stand in the middle of the paint and have the player move like, I can still see you, I can still see you, and kind of demonstrate that and do that with players. Yeah. Can you still see me? So they weren't, kids have that tendency to keep doing this back and forth, and you lose the ball and there's a drive coming at you and you don't see it. So being able to do that, I think is huge. And, working smarter, as you said, and not always chasing players and really knowing your positioning. I think that's a great coaching point in any defense, regardless of
right
the system that you use. So we saw some off-ball screens. We saw the gap defense.
Yep.
And have a question from a coach about, ball screens and what that looks like in a pack line defense. So can you talk a little bit about ball screens?
Yeah. So this is probably, if you're talking pack line with anybody or running a clinic or whatever, I think the most common question you're going to get is, okay, coach, how do we defend the ball screen? Because when you're, as a coach, you're going to defend 70% of the time, you're going to be defending some sort of ball screen action. And the more the game is evolving, I feel like the more we are seeing ball screens. So yeah, great topic. First thing I want to do is just pull up and kind of explain the at least from, again, a Virginia standpoint, and the way that we defended it at Lindenwood is breaking the court into basically two sections. So when you're defending ball screens, there's what we call inner third ball screens, okay, or middle ball screens. And you can kind of see here the highlighted area. If a ball screen set up in this area, this is an inner third ball screen. Okay, this is a middle ball screen, and we're going to defend that a certain way. And then there's an outer third ball screen, okay, or a side ball screen, and we're going to defend that a certain way. Okay, so just briefly, I wanted to kind of show that diagram so that people watching can kind of understand my terminology. There's an inner third, a middle third ball screen, and then there's an outer third ball screen. And we're going to have different ways of defending each of those. Okay. Now I'm going to pull up the film here, and we'll just kind of start with the middle third ball screen and, different ways of defending that. From a Virginia standpoint and, a Dick standpoint, and, what my dad and I did at Lindenwood is, when a middle third ball screen happened, there was basically, we kind of had two ways in which we could defend this. We could either quick show, which is kind of like a quick hard hedge, or we would flat hedge the ball screen. So I'm gonna show both of those examples here and just give you an idea of what those look like, and we'll kind of just talk through them. Okay, so here's against Syracuse. This is an Elite Eight game. There's a middle third ball screen. They quick show it and they're back. Okay, so it's almost like a big one step, show your chest and your back. And that quick show is it's good because, as you can see, it pushes the defender towards half court. Okay, it pushes the defender towards half court and it's back. What's challenging about that, especially in the middle third, is when you hard hedge or when you quick show on a middle third, that really opens up the paint in there. That opens up some space. So the terminology we used at Lindenwood is, anytime there was a middle third ball screen, our whole bench and all the guys who weren't involved in the ball screen would be yelling pinch. Pinch, pinch, pinch. And those three other guys not involved in the ball screen would kind of pinch into the paint. They would kind of close that paint up as that middle third ball screen was happening. And then our terminology for an outer third ball screen was flood. So anytime an outer third ball screen was happening, the bench and the three other players would be yelling, flood, flood, and they would all flood to the midline to help through that. So again, that's a good example there of kind of a quick show on that ball screen. Here'll be another one of just a quick show on the middle third ball screen. Here, Mamadi comes up, boom, quick show back. He does a really good job of jumping out and kind of scaring that guy into submission. He gets back to his man, and there's an outer third ball screen, which is more of a hard hedge, but we'll cover that here in a second. So those two were kind of just examples of what a kind of a quick show looks like in a middle third. Now I want to show an example of more of a flat hedge. Here, Virginia, again, this was against Iowa State. I think this was a Sweet 16 game in 2016. But Anthony Gill does a really good job of just a nice flat hedge. He kind of defends. He takes responsibility for the ball handler for a slide or two until London gets back. And again, everybody else on the back end is pinching into the paint there. Really good defense there by
Coach,
Devin.
can you just take us through, I guess, kind of two questions here, the quick show versus the hard hedge, and why you might quick show versus hard hedge. I know it seems like the middle third was seeing a quick show or the flat hedge, and a harder hedge on the outer third. So why is that the case in the middle, and why does that work well in this defense?
Yeah, I think because when a side ball screen is occurring, the court is kind of split in half. You're basically only defending half the court. So you can be a little bit more aggressive with those hard hedges. And you'll see Virginia, they'll mix up the timing. They'll do a quick show every so often in a side ball screen, or they'll do a longer hard hedge, depending on the scout. But in most cases, you'll see when an outer third ball screen is set, it'll be much more of a hard hedge, kind of stay there longer and really push that guy away from the basket, because the court is split in half on a side ball screen, and you have that whole defense kind of flooded over to one side. And then the middle third ball screen, you got to be a little bit quicker with your show, because that ball handler has kind of the whole court at his disposal in that case, which makes the help defense a little bit more difficult. So kind of a quick reasoning behind that is basically that the court is kind of split in half on the side, and the ball handler has the whole court at his disposal in the middle one. So with the flat hedge, go ahead.
One other question too, to kind of piggyback off of that, when players might reject a ball screen, what does that look like within the pack line defense? I know we're starting to see more teams doing that and going away from ball screens and rejecting as part of their offense and part of what they're trying to do to kind of get away from the hedge or get away from whatever the defense is trying to do. So what does it look like in those situations?
Yeah, really important component to this, and I'm glad you mentioned it. We've talked about the helper. Now the ball handler is vital, and the ball handler's job anytime a ball screen is happening is make him use the ball screen. Okay, you have to force him to use the ball screen. So there should be no refusal of a ball screen ever. And if he does want to refuse it, he's going to have to go out of bounds or something, or right through your chest. Okay. So especially on a side ball screen, when a side ball screen is happening, you should kind of close the space between you and your man, get your chest right on his low side hip, and make him use that ball screen. Force him to go over the help. We never want a guy to refuse the ball screen. When it's a middle third ball screen, when it's a little bit more open space, it might be a little bit harder to make him to jump up on this high shoulder here. That might be a little bit more difficult, but you can still give your guys an adamant rule that we do not allow ball handlers to refuse the screen. So we never over anticipate a ball screen and try to cut him off or jump in front of it. No. We want him to use that ball screen because that's where our help is. We're happy when they use the ball screens. And then another aspect that I think Tony does a great job of teaching at Virginia is how his players get through the ball screen. I think you'll see a main issue with a lot of teams when they defend ball screens is it takes their on-ball defender, a month to get through the on-ball screen. And then the big guys, he's staying too long, and the help defenders, they have to stay in too long. What Tony teaches his guys is a punch and a step. So basically when they get to the screen, they punch with their near arm, and they make a big step with their near foot, and they bust through that screen as quickly as they can, not coming out of their stance. Okay. London doesn't do a tremendous job of it. He comes up a little bit, but you can see him kind of throw that arm at the last second to help him get through that. And that makes a really, it makes it really important for those guards to get through those screens quickly. And I think that's a good way to teach it, is those guys to be aggressive, busting through those screens. And the flat hedge, I tend to lean towards the flat hedge in the middle third ball screen a little bit more than I do the quick show. I think it contains a little bit better. It keeps things clogged a little bit more. It puts a little bit less pressure on your help defenders pinching in. But I think both are good uses of ball screen defense. Let me see here. This will give us a look at a middle third and an outer third ball screen defense. Here with us, we did a kind of a flat hedge on the middle third. There was an outer third ball screen, but I think we'll see both here. Good, decent pressure there. Again, that right there is, if we went back in film, we would be talking to our man, that's not active hands, okay? That you can see his hands kind of down by his knees. That's not what we want on the ball. We want more active hands, tracing, digging, mirroring that ball. Okay, so here comes the middle third ball screen. Good, he stays in front. He doesn't let the man refuse it. He forces him over the screen. There's a flat hedge. The next guy is in his gap well. Okay, we get back here. That's good. We're still defending. Good. Another middle third ball screen, flat hedge. And I wanted to show this one because this was a perfect example of not pinching. Okay. The backside defender here did not pinch on this middle third ball screen. Okay. So he was pretty close to his man. You see how this is? And as soon as that middle third ball screen happens, he has to pinch. Okay. Especially since they've kind of overloaded this side. So it's this man's job to kind of bump this guy over here, and he's not pinched in well enough, which ends up giving up kind of that layup. We lucked out that they didn't get that there, but that was an example of poor pinching. We didn't pinch well enough on the backside, and kind of got hurt on it.
Coach, just two questions there.
Yep.
You mentioned the on-ball defender. Do you guys have a point of emphasis, a rule, whatever you want to call it, but with those on-ball defenders, should they always, thinking about the importance of ball pressure and this defense you've talked about a couple times, are they, always an arm's length away? Does it depend on the defender and their quickness? Or do you have any, how much or how tight do they want to be to that ball handler to really put that ball pressure on them?
Yeah, I think being close enough where you can, touch the ball, I think is pretty good as just a relative rule marker. But my dad would always say, be as close as your ability allows. He would say that often, so for our quickest guys, he said, there is no excuse for you. You should be all over this guy. Your ability allows you to put on immense pressure, to really close that gap, to really be a pest. And then other guys who maybe were a little bit more slow-footed, you got to be humble enough to know who you are, to work on those things. But, in the moment, maybe give a little bit more of a cushion and use your length to kind of help you in that regard. So I would say a basic rule of thumb is if you're not close enough to kind of really be right on top of that ball, tracing it, if you're not close enough to be swiping and getting deflections and tipping the ball, you're probably too far away. But that being said, you can base things a little bit on scouting report and stuff like that. But I think, another great kind of thing that you can talk with kids about is if the man that has the ball, if he's not worried about you, then you're probably not doing as good a job on the ball as you probably could be. If he's having a good time kind of just looking around and he's totally not worried about you, then then your ball pressure is pretty lousy. But the more you can get up there and trace and dig and swipe at that ball, and then he has to start to pivot and his eyes come to you a little bit more and away from what's going on in front of him, that's when you kind of have a good indication of our ball pressures in a pretty good place.
Coach, just one last question here.
Yep.
Thinking about coaches who might be a little bit more advanced and they might see some different types of actions. So I just want to bring up two other actions that are becoming more common, or at least one that's becoming more common at different levels, which is a Spain action where you're now setting a screen for that original ball screener. I'm not seeing a big issue with that in the pack line because you guys are, pinching. So you should be able to help when that original ball screener gets a back screen. Is that something you have to spend a lot of time on, or does the pinch really take care of any type of creative action like that?
Yeah, good question. Yeah, I think the pinch is kind of an initial thing that'll really help with it. But I also think it would take a little, if we faced a team who ran a unique action like that, we would cover it. And so basically the screener off of a ball screen is kind of what you're talking about. And that action can be defended similar to how we defended a cross screen action a little bit earlier we saw. I don't have any clips of the screener on the ball screen, but this kind of that bump on the low side can give you a good indication of, if this man was setting a screen on the ball screener, Kyle should bump his man on the low side. And by that bump, giving his man time to kind of show on the ball screen and then be back in time to get in position to help on his man. But that's a good question. I think initially off of that, when you're talking about, sorry, I'll stop the share. When you're talking about, multiple actions and unique, systems and styles and different actions like that, I think initially when you're pinched in there and really clogged up on the ball screen, that's gonna help you right off the bat. And then those extra things that you got to maybe go over in the 2 days prior to the game, I think are important things to cover. But yeah, just kind of a bump on the low side, I think can help cover that for a split second so that your man is back in time.
Yeah, I appreciate the kind of connection you made to the off-ball screen, and then that action being very, very similar, and how you can defend that. That's really great coaching point. And one other thing I wanted to bring up that we see really in transition, but maybe like two back-to-back ball screens, like a double drag type of situation. But if there's two screeners, how are you defending that? Is there a hedge? Is there a hard hedge, a soft hedge? Like, what is it that you guys typically try to do? And I know that's a little bit more of an advanced situation, and I know there's probably different ways you could do it, but just curious to get your perspective, again, for coaches who might be a little bit more advanced.
Yeah. So another good one. How we normally would defend it is, most of the double drags will usually be in the middle third. So we would defend it normally as, we always go over ball screen. So the man would be going over the ball screen. The first ball screen defender would basically flat hedge to the second screen, and then the second guy would flat hedge the rest of the way. And again, as the ball moves, they move, so as the ball moves this way, the man defending the screener, whether his man goes away or not, should be, closer to the ball than his man. So if this guy screens and rolls, we can bump that. And then wherever anybody else is, we're pinching in. If there's a backside guy here, we're pinching into the paint on this, really clogging things up. But usually what we do on those double drags is we'll flat hedge. The first guy will flat hedge to the second one, and the second guy will flat hedge like it's just a single ball screen in the middle third. But you could also hard hedge that second one. You could quick show that second one if you wanted to, depending on, the level of aggressiveness that you wanted to have. But yeah, those double drags, I don't fear those too much. I think those can be easily defended. And I think the more, we want to clog the paint with our defense, and the more that teams bring multiple guys together, I think it just clogs things up more. So when you have two guys setting the ball screen tandemly, I think there's just so many bodies there that we can usually handle it pretty well. But quick answer is you flat hedge the first one to the second one, and then you flat hedge the second one like it's a single.
Thanks, Coach, for taking the time to kind of go through some of those unique situations. And I, maybe not at the high school level, but I think at college coaches that are watching this are definitely experiencing that situation, and maybe at the high school level as well. So I appreciate you taking us through that. And we focused on, those middle third ball screens. So could you talk a little bit about some of the outer tier ball screens?
Yep. I want to pull up the film again, and we'll just go through the outer third. And from my perspective, whenever I face a team that sets outer third ball screens, I'm excited. I think it's something that's easy to defend for the pack. So we'll just see a really quick example, probably 3 or 4 examples of it. Syracuse is going to run their stuff here for a little bit. Now they're going to set an outer third ball screen. So like just what I said, earlier is as soon as we see an outer third ball screen happen, the back 3 guys should be flooding. Okay. And what's going to happen is we're going to force the man to use the ball screen, and we are going to blow this ball screen up. Okay. We are going to defend him basically until he passes. And what the backside big guy is doing is he's preparing to X out. So if the ball gets thrown to the screen man, the backside big, wherever he is going to take his partner's man. Okay. And you'll see that here. Isaiah comes across, they X out perfectly. The backside 2 guards, they'll play a little 2-man zone for a split second until the big guy gets back. And that was great coverage there on that hard hedge. We'll watch it one more time here just to show it. Okay. So Anthony Gill, here comes the ball screen. He sprints up there, and he just leaves his guy. He's going to trust his backside guys to do their job. He's basically going to give all his focus to the ball handler, and they're basically just, it's almost like a double team for a little while. Okay. He's going to blow that ball screen up and almost scare him into submission. And then if the ball gets thrown back to the big guy who rolls, we X out, we're in good shape. Everybody's back in position and we're fine. Okay. If he didn't throw it back to the big guy, then there would be no reason to X out, and we would be in good shape either way. The big guy would just recover. Okay, here's another example of an outer third ball screen. Pretty good gaps there. Here's the ball screen. We blow it up. This time, I wanted to show this because we didn't do a great job with this one, because they slipped this screen, and we kind of got baited into that slip and ran with them. Okay. There was no reason for us here to go with the slip man. We could have blown up this ball screen just fine, let him slip, because our big man on the backside was ready to X out. You see that? But because he kind of chased that slip, it opened up that gap a little bit. Now, the next man, even though this is kind of a double gap, he does a great job of kind of bluffing at that gap, being in there and forcing them a contested shot. Okay, here's another. I'm not sure if another one happens in this possession. I don't think it does. Let's move on to the next one. But that was a good example of what teams will do against a hard hedging team, is they'll slip the ball screens and try to get you to chase that slip and just funnel right into that gap that's open. And we don't want to chase that slip. We want to stay hard hedged and trust our backside defenders to do it. Okay, here's another one. You can see real early on, this is a great example. Really early on, our big guy, he's out there. He's hedging. He's blowing that up. I would prefer our ball handler or the man defending the ball to be more in pressure and really to put some pressure on that guy. And then the backside defenders do a great job here of flooding. Ball screens happening. They're completely flooded. So even if this man slipped, he would be slipping into 3 guys. Okay, you see that? And they try to zip it to the corner and slip them, but we're still flooded, and we do a good job there. So that was a pretty good example. And here's Virginia. I put a slip example in here with Clemson. They would do it a lot. And you can see Mamadi, he showed himself the hedge, but Jack was there on the backside ready for the slip. And we almost could have Jack just a little bit further over and maybe get a steal on this. He was a little bit late getting there, but does a great job of contesting the slip. But that's what we want our big guys to do. We want them to show those numbers and really, really take away that drive middle.
A question. I heard the word, and I love it. I heard the word trust a couple of times, and players really trusting their teammates to be in that position. And one thing I haven't asked about is communication. So just curious, just to get your thoughts in general defensively on communication, on developing that trust. How important is it, with those players, and I know it's hard sometimes, especially when you get in big arenas that are extremely loud.
Yep.
Maybe they don't hear each other as well, but I guess in practice, if they're talking, they build that trust for the games. They know that their teammates are going to be there. But how important is that, the trust and the communication piece, and how do you build that among players? Because I mean,
Yeah.
whatever team it was, whether it was Virginia, or the other teams, Millikin that you were showing there, you could see that like the players were in their position, they were doing their job, and their teammates had complete faith that they were going to be there.
Mm-hmm.
So, how do you teach that to the players, and how tough is that to get across?
Yeah, it's a challenge. I think it's especially challenged with guys who are maybe a little bit more internal, guys who are a little bit quieter, who that's just not their personality. I think as coaches, it's our responsibility to force it out of them. My dad would always say, you can have any personality you want off the court, but when you're on the court, you better be vibrant, you better be chatty. What I always try to encourage our guys with is, I think the biggest issue that kids have sometimes with communicating is that they're unsure of what to say. They're unsure of, how should I say it, or, how is it going to come across, or whatever it may be. And I always encourage our guys, just say what you're doing. That's a very basic thing, but just talk yourself through what you're doing. Not only is that going to help your teammate, but it's going to help you kind of reminding yourself where you should be. So I think the onus kind of comes to us coaches, as we have to constantly be emphasizing the chatter. We have to constantly be emphasizing the talk and encouraging our kids, just say what you're doing. Whether that means every time the ball gets passed, you yell, jump to the ball. That's a great reminder. You might sound like an idiot, but that's good. And yelling gap, and yelling, I got your help, or I got your help, and I'm on ball, and all those different things are so important. And just talking through what you're doing is a great way to start. You don't have to be perfect with your terminology, but just explaining what you're doing out loud is automatically going to make your individual defense better and the trust as a team better. So yeah, really good question, really good point. So yeah, that was a pretty good example, at least briefly. Obviously I could spend 5 hours discussing the pack, but briefly on kind of how to defend an outer third ball screen, from a basic pack perspective, is blowing that outer third ball screen up, flooding the backside, getting the backside big prepared to X out on the slip or on the roll, and then everybody else kind of reacting accordingly. So yeah, I think that the inner third and the outer third are obviously kind of the two places where you want to start. And then there's a bunch of other ball screens that you may face, like we talked about the double drag, and they have the 9 screen, or the baseline ball screen. And there's all different types of things, but those are kind of the two main ones that I thought would be best to cover.
No, I appreciate you sharing that perspective, and especially the piece at the end there on communication, and how important that is, defensively, for players to,
Yep.
Talk it out and talk out their role and what they're doing out there situationally. So we've kind of gone through different aspects of the game, and I know obviously the post is something that we also have. We're seeing less of it. Depends on the level, though. It depends on the team, the program, their principles, and what they do. So there is still some post game, whether it's guards or traditional post type players. And actually kind of curious about that as maybe we talk about this next piece. Do you guys do anything differently? I think of Villanova a couple years back, and them posting some of their guards up a little bit more.
Mm-hmm.
And we're seeing other teams doing that, but obviously there's the traditional post players too. So how do you respond to those different situations?
Yeah.
Backline defense.
Yeah, I think one of the things that most intrigue, or another one of the kind of the main questions that people have when they ask about the pack line, is Virginia's, post double, that everybody sees. Okay, these guys are post doubling a lot, and how do they do that? Well, what's the communication? What are the rules? All these different things. And Dick had an awesome line that said, one of my main jobs as a head coach is never let a big guy beat me. You can never let a big guy beat you. And that's what the kind of the post double came from. And very, very basically, what Virginia does, what Wisconsin did, and what other teams do that utilize the post double is anytime there's a post feed to a big guy, they will big on big post double. So you'll rarely ever see a guard on big post double, but you'll always see a big on big post double. And we'll go through these things, but the main terminology that we need to know is low hole, high hole, and this is for the backside defense. And the main things that need to be covered when the post double happens is whoever threw in the ball, whoever post fed, whoever's defending that post feeder must lock down his man. The last thing we want is for us to post double and then throw it right back out to the guy who threw it in. Okay. So you deny the man who threw it in, and then the backside guards, the two guys on the backside, cover the low hole and the high hole. Essentially, when the ball goes into the post, the ball goes in here. We have backside, let's say we have a backside big, a backside guard, post feeder. We throw it into the post. This backside big comes in post doubles on the pass, and we hit him really hard. This guy is defending his man tightly. And then on the backside, we should have a guard here and a guard right about here. We want to fill the low hole and the high hole. These two boxes need to be filled on the backside so that the second the ball goes in here, this man is anticipating the pass and hitting it. And then these two backside guards are filling the low hole and filling the high hole. And they're basically playing a two-man zone against three on the backside. And as long as these guys do a great job with high hands and putting their chests on the guy and making it difficult, as long as we don't allow the throwback, they're going to have to retreat dribble and, pitch it over the top with a high lob pass. And if that's the case, we can get back out to our positioning. So that's very basic kind of explanation of what they do defensively. And then we'll jump into some film here real quick. Just to kind of show that. We'll see the low hole and the high hole defended. We'll see the anticipation from the big guy, and then we'll see kind of the rotation out of it. Okay, there's the post double. They bring the post double right away, and you can see the low hole and the high hole are filled by the pack two guys. So Brogdon and Harris are both kind of, they're defending three guys with two, while London is not letting his man throw the ball out. Okay, they do a pretty good job there of keeping him under control. He pivoted through the double, which is not necessarily what you want, but they did a good enough job to kind of handle it. North Carolina always seems to have trouble with the post double when they play them. They always seem to have a traditional postman who Virginia is always going to double. And if you just watch Isaiah Wilkins here, he's like anticipating the pass already. He's so ready to go in there. They set a cross screen and they switch it. Look at here, you can just see him. He's just on his toes. Just in the split second this ball gets thrown, he's leaving before the ball is even passed. So here goes the ball in, boom. He's there. The split second that guy catches the ball, Isaiah's there, and now we have Devin is denying the post feeder, so we can't let the ball out here. And then Malcolm and London, they're responsible for the three backside guys. So Malcolm's going to cover the low hole. He's going to take away that pass for a layup. And London's kind of covering the high hole here and taking away that pass. And they do a great job, and they get a hand on it, and they tip it. And if you do it right, it can be really frustrating for opposing teams to play against. Let's get another look at one here. This is against Clemson in 18 or 19, I think. Okay, so they'll reverse it a little bit here. Good, we're fine with our positioning. They try to slip a little middle third ball screen. They handle that well. There was a good a ball screen switch. They had the personnel to do that. Here goes the post feed. This time the four-man's man was at the top of the key, okay? And you'll see a little bit of a different rotation here. Because they switched that ball screen, now we were defending our four-man kind of on a three-man who is at the top of the key. The ball goes in the post. We still post double, okay? Backside guys have to cover the low hole and the high hole. You can see the man in the low hole tells the guy here that he's got to get up and cover that high hole, and he does a good job. He rotates there. They rotate again, and they rotate again. And that was a really good possession kind of out of a difficult situation after a switch ball screen. Okay, but you can see the importance on the backside there of the low hole, high hole.
Always doubling, coach. And so anytime in the post, always doubling. Is there any exception to that? Or, if it's a traditional post player, that four-man's always going to get in and double on the five-man.
Yeah, it depends. I mean, it totally depends on kind of the coach's mentality. You know, do you want to be ultra aggressive? Do you want to play it a little straight up? Are you playing a big man who's dominant on the post, or are you playing a big man that your guy can handle, you know, by himself? So those are all decisions that you need to make. There'll be some games where, you know, Virginia or, you know, us at Lindenwood or Millikin, where we faced two traditional posts and both of them were posting up, and both of our 5 and our 4 had to be prepared to post double, and we would post double both of those guys. There would be times where Virginia will play a guy where they just think that Jack Salt's a better defender than he is an offensive player, and they'll just let Jack handle him on his own. But then there's other games where, man, this guy's just a horse down there, and we got to double him on every catch. So I think you can kind of manage it the way that you want, and kind of pick and choose who you want to double. But I tend to be with the mentality of being more aggressive with the post double. And frankly, I think it's a good idea to post double even big guys who aren't that great. I think putting a big guy in a position where he's being double teamed and he has to make decisions and throw the ball out of a double team, that's going to lead to turnovers. That's going to lead to some fast breaks for you. And I think that aggressive mentality is always good for a defense. So I got 2 more post double clips just to get a look at them. Okay, there's the post double. Here comes the big guy, low hole, high hole getting filled. There's a skip pass. They did a good job of getting out of it. And here's a perfect example. They threw it right back into the post on the other side, and they followed with an immediate double on the other side. The low hole and the high hole was filled, and North Carolina was just so flustered with that possession they couldn't even deal with it. I want to show it again just because it's so good. There it goes in the post. Mike Tobey's ready. He's a little bit late on the post double, comes with low hands, a little bit higher hands, and a little bit quicker would be better. The low guy gets stuck a little bit below that big guy, but he does a good job of getting out there. They immediately throw it back in. Nolte comes across immediately. They cover low hole, high hole. Just a great possession of defense. Really, really good there. Here comes the post double. Anticipation. Isaiah was phenomenal at anticipating the post double. He's there. As soon as that guy back dribbles, they retreat out of it. Okay. And you can see that's a great example. You want your backside guards to be like DB mentalities. You know, you want to be a defensive back mentality, reading the quarterback's eyes and going for the interception. So I think what I love about the side ball screens, the outer third ball screens, and the post double is that it brings this really aggressive mentality to your defense. And most people, I think, tend to think of the pack line as a less aggressive defense. And it probably is less aggressive than maybe a push denial style of defense, but you can impose some of that aggressiveness through your post double and through your hard hedge on the outer third.
Coach, I wanted to ask, do teams have any success with any actions on the weak side? With the double, I feel like it is tough to throw over the top, I guess, for one. And the double team is getting there so quickly, so they might not have time. But just wondering if, like, you know, 2 of the offensive players, like, set screens on those other 2 defensive players, and you got a guy open and, you know, a skip opposite. And the teams I didn't see, you know, North Carolina trying to do it, or like any of those teams doing it. Have you seen that at all with teams trying to run actions on the weak side, or is it just too hard to really make that skip with the double team with 2 guys with their hands up, you know, in your face?
Yeah. Yeah, I've seen teams try to take advantage of it for sure. I think it's definitely easier to take advantage of it, you know, on the whiteboard. It's easier to take advantage of it in practice. And then when your players when the opposing players get put in that situation where they have the ball and they have to scramble and it's, you know, a pressure oriented situation, it's harder to execute those scenarios. But the biggest challenge, I think, is when teams will overload a side. So they'll basically post feed from the corner, and they'll have a top guard not at the top of the key anymore, but more on like the post side wing. Then they'll have a big guy on the backside and only one guard on the weak side. So you don't really have 2 guys there to cover the low hole, high hole. Then the backside guard has to choose, do I take the low post or do I take the guy at the top of the key? So that one scenario, I think, is challenging to guard against. And And I've seen teams try to do that. And in those cases, you know, they might take the post double off or keep that wing guy sucked in there. But yeah, that's probably, if I was facing the post double, that's probably what I would try to do. If my Millikin boys were going up against Virginia, that's what I would probably do. But they probably wouldn't post double us.
Yeah, I do. I see it being so hard, and having the ball in a post player's hands, who's probably not a great passer in general, with two guys that are equally as tall with their hands up, putting pressure on them. I just feel like you're putting them in a really, really tough spot. I like it a lot, and I love watching Virginia and whether it's North Carolina, Duke, whoever they're playing. When I see them do that, I see teams have a lot of difficulty with it. So I appreciate you taking us through kind of the why behind it, and even the rotations, and you know, the high-low positioning from the weak side guards
for sure.
You know, as I see all this, and I see this defense, and you know, there's a lot of different things to it, and I think obviously if teams get really good at it, they're going to be highly successful. We've seen that at a lot of different levels. I know high school teams in my state that run it, very, very successful with it, and obviously there's college, and you even see obviously aspects teams really shrinking the floor at the professional level,
right?
Too. So, you know, just thinking about a defense like this and the teaching that goes into it, what are some of the breakdown drills that you guys do, or you know, maybe just one or two that you could put out there for coaches that are going to teach this? And I'm sure also at the end we'll have to maybe share your information, because you're probably going to get a lot of contacts from coaches. But
absolutely,
one or two breakdown drills that you really like that help teach, you know, maybe one aspect of this defense or another.
Yeah, I always would start with kind of the foundational drill that, playing for my dad, we did it. I don't remember going one day without running this drill, and same with Dick. 3-on-3, it's called 3-on-3 closeout. And essentially what it is, it's about as basic as you can get. And coaches are probably going to say, well, yeah, of course, that's, you know, a basic shell drill. But essentially you just have, sorry if you can see that. You just have, you know, 3 guys, 3 defenders. Coach starts down here with the ball. He chucks it to one of them, and you play 3-on-3. We normally, you know, you can start kind of, you know, by giving each guy, say, okay, you have to stay in your third of the court. You know, you can penetrate and you know, drive and kick and do all that, but you got to stay in your third of the court to start. And you really, what this really does is it forces upon the defense to be great in their gaps. It forces the defense to be great in their closeouts, to be jumping to the ball, to, you know, learn to have, you know, learn to deal with those double gaps, you know, so you can scoot this guy down to the corner and make the gaps really big. And that's just as basic as you can get with a pack line drill is 3-on-3 closeout. And you just get those guys working on, you know, guarding their yard, and defending as a unit, and being there and anticipating the pass and closing out and all different stuff like that. So I mean, if there was one drill that I was going to do every day with my team, it would be 3-on-3 closeout. And then you can kind of manage it on your own. If you one day you want to work on, you know, give and go cuts, you can do that. If you want to work on singles away, you can work on that. If you want to work on, you know, whatever it may be, you can manage all that within your 3-on-3 closeout system. But I always, at least when I start the year, we start with 3-on-3 closeout. Nobody can move. They have to stay in their third. And we just really work on, impress upon our defenders. You stay in your gap. You get in that gap. Be, you know, closer to the ball than your man, in the pack, have vision, protect the elbows, guard your yard, great closeouts, active hands. All those foundational basic things are all covered in the 3-on-3 closeout. And then I think, you know, I mean, foundationally, like I mentioned earlier, if you're not great on the ball, and if you're not great, with your closeouts, you're not going to have a good pack line defensive team. So I think the more closeout drills you can do throughout the year, it's again, a tendency of coaches to cover the basic stuff, the first week and a half of practice, and then they kind of forget about them as practice goes. But if you as a coach can figure out ways to, every practice, we are going to do some sort of closeout drill, whether that's for 2 minutes or 5 minutes or whatever, we have to get our closeouts in. We have to pound into our head how they're going to close out each time they go to the ball. And then I think one-on-one defense is so important. And my favorite drill with that is what we call, one-on-one zigzag, full court zigzag. So basically we tell the guys that the out of bounds line is the lane line extended. Okay. And so they go the full court, they'll start with their partner here, and they basically just have to defend this space, and their partner's trying to whoop them. Their partner's trying to just cook them around, and they have to basically guard their yard, for the full court. And it's really a good challenging drill for the on-ball defender, but it teaches those guys to protect their feet, to keep a cushion, to have active hands, to show their hands to the referee, to guard the distance that we need them to guard, but not overextend them. In the pack, we're not asking you to defend, 10 feet to your left and 10 feet to your right. All you have to defend is, 3 feet to your right and left. If you can guard your yard, you are going to have help at that position. So, the one-on-one zigzag, full court one-on-one zigzag is a really good one. Any closeouts you can do, and then 3-on-3 closeout is super important.
Coach, it was great talking to you the first time we had a chance to talk offense, but I love defense. I love sitting down and really getting into this stuff and, learning about different defensive philosophies. And it was very refreshing to hear you talk about the fundamentals, and even here at the end, the three versus three closeouts and the zigzag drill. And there's just there's so much of a benefit to using drills like that and helping players, like you said, to learn how to guard the yard, to learn how to close out the right way, and all those little details that make such a big difference. So I really appreciate that, about you as a coach, and, you sharing those things with other coaches. As we wrap up here today, just wanted to ask one last question for coaches that are watching this, really want to implement the pack line defense. I think they got a really good run through of what this looks like. What advice would you have for coaches that are either using the pack line or thinking about using the pack line? What advice do you have for them as they're trying to implement this with their team?
Yeah. I think similar to kind of what you said right there at the end is it's easy to get lost in, the new drills and the new concepts and, focusing on the whole a little too much when, man, if we can just really lock in on the fundamentals and the basics of our system, obviously the kids need to understand the whole. They need to understand what you're doing and why we're doing it. And you have to teach that. But I think we, as coaches, we can get lost, especially as the season goes on. We can get lost in worrying about, we got to defend this action. We got to defend this action and fade away from teaching the basics of the defense, teaching the basics of on-ball defense, the basics of active hands and jumping to the ball and being in the correct positioning and communicating and all those things. So I tend to always, especially from a defensive standpoint, but also an offensive standpoint, always revert back to the fundamentals, always revert back to the basics of the system and of the defense. And I think it's a really good system. I think you have to have an ability as a coach to get your kids to buy into the team mentality, to the 5 men working as a unit mentality, and trusting their teammates and having their teammates' backs and all that stuff. But the fundamentals are the basis of this defense. Great on-ball defense, great closeouts, great positioning, anticipation, awareness, communication, all that stuff. So stick to the fundamentals and get your kids to play their butts off, and you'll be in good shape.
Coach, I'm going to sneak in one more question here. I could be here all night talking defense. I love it. I'm going to let you go, I promise. But just one more question I wanted to ask in terms of implementing, a successful defense. Thinking about practice time, this comes up a lot, and I'm curious to get your perspective if you have a 2-hour practice or a 90-minute practice, whatever it looks like at the college level or,
Yeah.
whatever. But how much time do you dedicate? Is it a 50-50, a 60-40? Maybe it varies from day to day, but how much time and emphasis are you spending on, the pack line? Or would you recommend, I know it might fluctuate from coach to coach, but how much time and emphasis would you recommend, just an estimate, I guess, coaches spend on this defense?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I would say it kind of depends on the coach. I would say my dad was probably a 60-40 kind of guy. I would say, Tony's probably a 50-50 kind of guy from at least from the practices I had been to. I think it's really important that, that you're spending at least half the time on the defense. And then very day to day, as coaches, we can kind of say, well, man, we had a really bad defensive practice yesterday. We got to go 80-20 tomorrow. So I don't think there's a hard, fast set thing. But what I was really impressed by when I did get to go, to some practices that Tony was running was the ability he had to within their warm-ups to get the basic fundamental work done kind of at the beginning of their practice. So when they would start their practice and they would still do, some 3-man weave and warm up stuff that most teams do. But a lot of stuff he would do within their warm ups, say they warm up for 10 minutes, they would have, quick 2-minute drills where they would do closeouts for a warm up, or they would do, tracing the ball for a warm up, or a deflection drill, or whatever it may be. He would kind of intertwine fundamental emphasis of the defense into their warm up, which I thought was really, really good because, again, like I mentioned, as coaches, we can lose track of those fundamental things. Early on in the year, we'll focus 10 minutes or 20 minutes on those fundamental things. But as the season goes on, we kind of lose that. Oh, I don't have time to spend 20 minutes on those anymore. But he was able to just emphasize closeouts every day. He was able to emphasize tracing the ball every day, jumping to the ball, or whatever it may be in their warm-up drills. So I think that's a great way to augment a little bit of your practice time by being creative enough to mix in some defensive fundamental and even offensive fundamental stuff into your warm-ups, and not just always doing, okay, let's do three-man weave, or let's do, jogging back and forth. Just kind of be a little more creative with your warm-ups so that you can get those fundamental things in early on and then have a little bit more time to spend on the whole.
Coach, I so appreciate your time taking us through the pack line. There's so much value in what you've shared today. I've learned a lot as a coach, and really, really appreciate you taking the time to take us through everything. For coaches who are watching this, they might want to reach out. They might have some questions. So if you're willing to maybe share out some information where they might be able to reach out to you and ask some questions.
Yeah, for sure. My Twitter handle is at Coach K Sodie, SODIE. You can definitely contact me there. And then also on the MILLIKIN website, my email and my office phone are on there. So I'm always happy to talk hoops. From our last video, I got several calls about the motion, which was good. I got to talk to some high school coaches about that. And I always welcome phone calls and emails and questions. I'd be more than happy to discuss concepts and thoughts and anything else anybody would like to discuss. So I got an open email and an open phone line. So more than welcome.
Well, thank you again, Coach. I appreciate that. And coaches like you who are willing to, share their expertise, share and help grow the game. It means a lot. And for me to be able to do this and meet so many great coaches like yourself, I feel very fortunate. So thank you again for your time today.
My pleasure, John. Thanks for having me.